This panel, please give a warm welcome to one of my favorite folks in the thoroughbred industry, fellow native Chicagoan, as myself, big by her career at TVG. She's worked for ABC, NBC, ESPN, all the networks, and every racing outlet available. Some of you folks in the room, particularly old timers, might remember a jockey named Ted Atkinson in the Hall of Fame. He is the grandfather of Kate and Bradar, please. And try to stay on script, please.
I'm just happy to be able to be talking to you today. If you might remember, I gave Julie a few gray hairs last year when about this time I came down with a terrible case of bronchitis and laryngitis. So much healthier and much happier in terms of being here today to join you in sunny California as I left a lot colder and a little bit drearier weather in Kentucky, but it is really a privilege to be back with you. And I will use the glasses to stay somewhat on script, but our panel today is very exciting to me because as some of you might know, one of the things that I do in my work for TVG and in handicapping is look at horses, and part of this panel will be discussing conformation. When I'm looking for a picture of a horse, it's kind of more general, but our panelists are going to be able to give you some specifics as to what they're looking for in the horses that they select for those owners that they advise. We're going to discuss what owners and their advisors learn and look for in equine athletes before they ever get to the racetrack. Our panels are going to walk you through the process that they use and things that any owner, and we said long time, but I think any owner in the business should consider: pedigree, nicking, and conformation, all part and parcel of that. We have three very distinguished panelists. I'm going to introduce them one by one. The first, a second-generation horseman who's developed his passion for connecting thoroughbreds and their owners by intense study of pedigrees and making recommendations. Just using those types of mating recommendations alone, he's helped to produce Grade 1 Kentucky Derby and stakes winners for clients across the country. Please welcome Clark Shepard. Our next panelist is the founder and co-owner of McMahon and Hill Bloodstock, also Bourbon Lane Stables. He's played an integral role in matching successful equines to successful owners. He's a graduate of Cornell and the Irish National Stud Program, and he serves as president of the Thoroughbred American Charities, I believe, but also a TOBA board member. And Mike, if I messed that up, I'm sorry, a part of my script deleted right as I was looking at it, but please welcome Mike McMahon. And our final panelist grew up on a cattle ranch in Northern California and honed his love of horses and talent for recognizing what makes for a sound, superior equine athlete. His passions for the thoroughbred industry took him to Kentucky, and he opened a bloodstock agency 25 years ago. We're so glad to have him back here with us again to chat. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Pete Bradley. Now, I'm going to have the opportunity for everybody to ask questions at the end, and also everybody to chime in, but we're going to start one by one because we do have some slides, and I know the panelists have kind of prepared different statements, so I'm going to start with you, Clark, with some questions. When we talk about pedigree, many people think we're just talking about the sire and the dam, but as an expert, you're going to research pedigrees and look at them way beyond the sire and the dam. How far back do you go into a horse's family line, and what are you looking for?
Did you say expert? Stretch. No, actually, I'll go back 7 generations. There's just so much more that you can see. Like a typical sales catalog would just show 3 generations. So there's so much more to each of us. I mean, 3 generations is basically our parents, our grandparents, and our great-grandparents. We don't always get that full picture, so I like to, and when I'm doing pedigrees, I like to see balance. So you really can't see a whole lot of balance just within that small frame, so I like to open it up a little bit more to be able to do proper line breeding to bring those forward.
And we're going to take a look at some slides that you've brought us. We're going to take a look at a 5-generation pedigree for Animal Kingdom, and then we're going to follow it by more spirit. If we could put the first slide up, can you give us some insights as to what you view as important in these animals' pedigrees? What are you looking for here?
Well, both these horses I did the matings for, so that's why I selected these. And there's, as you can see, there is balance there. So it's not, so let me drop back and say, inbreeding to me is duplicating individuals within the first 4 generations. Anything outside of the 4 is what I term line breeding. So you don't really want to be too inbred as a horse. You want to produce hybrid vigor, but you also want balance. But back to what I said about, just with a typical sales catalog, you just see 3 generations. So if that was the case, if I was looking through a sales catalog, I would not see the line breeding to Lafard there. I would not see that it is a gender balance. So basically, it's through a daughter of Lafard and it's through a son of Lafard.
We take a look at the next slide. When we look at more spirit, and in general, I'm curious, you talk about the balance and you talk about looking back at 4 or 5 generations. Are the closer generations more important than the 4 or 5, or is it balanced throughout evenly?
I like to look at balance throughout because, like I said, you don't want to be too inbred. And 3 by 4 is the closest inbreeding that I will do. But again, here with more spirit, you can see the Seattle Slew line breeding, and that's through a daughter and through a son as well. And you can also see there's another Northern Dancer line breeding back there through Stellar Odyssey and then through Dixieland Band, both son and daughter.
Now, can you tell the difference between a 5-generation pedigree and a catalog-style pedigree?
Catalog style being like the actual sales catalog or the product?
When you're looking at a catalog style or what you would see in a catalog?
Again, all you see is 3 generations within a catalog. So there again, you would not even be able to flip through there and see any of that. So the 5 generation here shows me a little bit more about the history of the horse or the potential racehorse capability of it, but also the catalog page, 3 generations, but it's more a tale of the female family itself.
And finally, and everybody's going to get a chance to kind of chime in on the same themes, but when we talk about nicking, referring to a pedigree or a potential matchup or mating, can you give us a good definition of what a nick is and why so many breeders use it?
A nick is basically, it's a report of sire line to sire line, so more spirit, we can look at that. So basically, we would be looking at probably, and even at the time, the nicking programs will basically, it's a report of history, so they will go back until they get ample support for what they're looking for. So, for this one, it may have been Giants Causeway over Dixieland Band mares, but that's just sire line to sire line. Female families are so important in breeding racehorses and trying to find racehorses. So, every individual has its own female family. So that's the thing about good balanced line breeding is trying to bring it forward. But again, it's just a report of sire line to sire line. Some people breed on it. It gets a lot of people excited. I can't say that I'm a huge fan, but if it affirms what you've found anyway, and everybody gets excited about it, then more power.
Pete, let's pick up on what Clark was talking about, and how do you feel about nicking, inbreeding, pedigree? How much emphasis do you place on that versus, say, conformation?
I think it's very important to go back to good taproot families, but I, like a lot of people in the horse business, have a different opinion, and I like to see what's up close and what's up front. And to me, the first 2 generations are really what I look at, and then wanting it to go back to a strong pedigree with a lot of depth to it. But if I don't see runners or potential runners in those first 2 generations, it's usually something that drops down my list as far as what I want to buy, depending on what the conformation is.
And in terms of those even immediate pedigrees, nicking, how important is that to you? Do you use that, or do you kind of go more toward the physical?
It's a tool. Again, since you're looking at sire to sire, it doesn't necessarily give you the whole picture. And like Clark said, you have to look at the female families as well. And I look for patterns within the female families to what works. And in my opinion, that's probably more important than the nicking. But the nicking does give you a pathway. So one thing about nicking, it's not how many times it works for me. If I see a pattern where it doesn't work at all, that's when I use nicking more as a tool than, if 3 of 10 crosses between the Giants Causeway and the Dixie Union are stakes winners or stakes horses, that's solid. But if 0 of 10 are, I look at that even more so.
Mike, your thoughts? The same question. What is your most important priority?
I'm really glad to hear Pete's comments, because I modeled my business after Pete, and I'm more in line with his theories than the really deep stuff. I mean, there's a lot of problems with nicking. It is sire line to sire line, as these guys have both said, but it's also historical, not predictive. So if the horse wins the Breeders' Cup Classic on Saturday, this breeding season, that mating will be duplicated 100 times. When those horses turn 2, unless he has 32-year-old stakes winners, that nick becomes an F, right? Because that means there's 100 new runners, and there's no, a 2-year-old stakes winner, maybe maybe each sire gets 1 or 2, right? By the time they're 5 or 6, a good stallion might have 15 or 20, but it doesn't matter if the very first year when you breed your mare and it's an A++ nick, and then 3 years later there's 100 2-year-olds that start, and all of a sudden it's an F. So they're not predictive, they're historical. And the data is also somewhat in question. I mean, you've got, some groups will use restricted stakes as part of their data set. Other groups, that True Nicks does, that's the Jockey Club. So that's the True Nicks is kind of the one that I would rely on more, because it is actually from our industry database, the Jockey Club. Other companies actually produce their own databases.
We are going to talk just briefly a little bit more about the different things that we can use, tools for nicking, but I want to pick up on, so we talked a little, your philosophy pedigree-wise, but what about confirmation? How important is that to you? And I'm wondering if there are certain things that are, absolute must-haves or absolute no's.
Well, Mr. Money, who's running in the Dirt Mile, is a horse that my wife and I bred, and he's out of a big Tisnau mare. We wanted first to breed her to a Stormcat line horse, because that is a nick that works. It always worked for Tisnau. I think his first Breeders' Cup winner was out of a Stormcat mare. So that was kind of one way we went, but we also wanted to have she's a big mare. She's 16.3, and she's scopy and very Tisnau. And we needed a very correct horse, because she was, a little bit towed in. So we had to work through that and then find the right stallion. So it kind of narrows us down. And I never even looked at a nick until I got down to, 4 or 5 physical type stallions that I thought would tidy her up, make her more compact and muscular, and never even really got into this until I got down to 2 or 3 horses, and then started to really maybe break some ties and do some things like that.
Okay, and given that there's no such thing as the perfect horse, or very rare anyway, if there is such a thing, conformationally, what are the things that help you decide horses to bid on? You talked about finding balance within the conformations of the horses you're breeding, but when you're bidding on a horse, what are you looking for?
Well, I am like Pete in that I want to see a mare that's produced, or at least hasn't been a failure. I want to see that she's produced a number of good race horses. She has to be from a very good family if I'm going to spend real money on her. And I really like made sires. I don't like pedigrees that have failed sires throughout them as the sires of broodmares. I want proven, nice stallions, especially when I'm buying a filly. I want real solid stallions in there.
And Pete, I'm going to circle back to the nicking products, because there are 2 basically that are available for owners and breeders, e-nicks and True Nicks, and Mike touched on it, but without getting into a lot of comparisons with those, I'm just wondering how you feel those products can help owners and breeders in selecting young horses, if you feel they can.
Again, I think it's a tool. If it's the only component you're using, you're not going deep enough at all into the matings. And again, it's sire to sire related, which we've said before. And I really think you have to look at the female families. There are a couple of other products out there that will do more in-depth analysis on female families, and I think that you should integrate that into the process of doing a mating.
As far as confirmation, when bidding on a horse, what things are you looking for?
You know, the first thing I need is a frame. I need that overall balance, the depth of the shoulder, how the neck ties in, that the hip is on the same angle as the shoulder. I want to look at a horse and go, wow, that's a nice horse. Then start getting picky and saying, what can I live with and what can't I live with? For the American dirt horse, horses that are extremely upright in their pasterns is something that very rarely stands training. The angle of the hoof and the pastern and then up the leg, that's the shock absorber. And if you're just doing this, you're going to come up with problems instead of having that angle that allows the horse to float over the ground.
Can you think of a horse that you compromised in terms of what you're generally looking for, standards as far as conformation, maybe that had a flaw, and then it turned out that the horse overcame it?
Well, there's one thing everybody always does is once you just look at the conformation, you look at how the horse walks and how it uses itself, that it throws its shoulder out, that its hind end comes up underneath it and pushes off very well. You want horses that are basically correct through the knees. And I bought a filly who couldn't walk at all and was a little offset through the knees, but she looked really good on the racetrack at a 2-year-old sale. Her name's Day at the Spa, and she was a pretty good one for us. Couldn't walk a lick.
How about you, Mike?
You know, I'm reminded Jack Knowlton's in the crowd here, and we sold Funnyside to Jack's, to a pinhooker who then sold it to Jack. And he had a very interesting conformation of his foot and pastern angle that kept a lot of people from liking him. And you know, it was a severe enough fault, but it was combined with the fact that he was a ridgeling, and that had kind of made his back go a little high, and all of a sudden he had 3 strikes against him, and he was in Distorted Humor's first crop. But there was a horse that was a superstar that really had major conformational problems as a yearling, which he matured out of, mostly.
Clark, I started the conversation with you talking about pedigree, so now I'll ask is one more important than the other to you as far as conformation versus pedigree? Are they equal? And, you know, same question, if there's things that you're looking for specifically as far as conformation.
I may do things a little differently than a lot. So at the sale, and I don't know how you guys, you may have people that go out ahead of you and then give you the recommendations, so they shortlist for you. I'm basically scripted when I go. So I've done the pedigree analysis, I've done all the research, and then also my clients, I have to take into account what they want. So I'll just basically throw all that list together. So I am scripted. So back to what's more important. So my analysis, Nick's, whatever you want to do, we can create the biggest black box ever, okay? And it could be, but there's always going to be outliers. But like I say, I'm scripted, I go to that horse, but you know, it may be the greatest thing on the face of the earth on my page, but if there's a rat standing in front of me,
You don't go.
no, you're on to the next one.
So what would constitute that? I mean, is it just generally how they look and appear, or are there specific things that you're looking for when you're looking at
It's
them?
everything they've touched on, and Pete said it, you know, when they walk out of the barn, you want to see balance, and you want your eye just to go, wow. And then there's sometimes the horse, they can't move, or it's that initial. So once you see that, and then you really hone in onto it, and then like Pete said, you start breaking it down.
Have you compromised on that, or has there been one that initially you thought no, but then you went back and then it worked out?
I'm sure there are, and I just, you know, just some of the sales that I just finished up with, you know, I went back and forth on several, and it's just kind of like, but you know, you do it enough, you kind of have that gut, you know. The horse will let you know.
This is for everybody. When you're choosing racehorses and for clients, are you looking at unproven sires? Do you focus more on the proven? And I'm curious about dams of, you know, young horses, especially with the first dams. If they don't have a produce record, does that matter to you? And if you know a young horse, you know, that strikes you as just incredible and has no pedigree at all, are you still going to like it as much as you would with the pedigree there? Anybody?
I guess really only one stallion per crop usually makes it. You know, one or maybe two. So The first part of that question is there a young stallion you're going to use? I think as a breeder, you have to be very critical of each new stallion and assume that 99% of them aren't going to make it. But I always pick out one. I mean, because price point in breeding is so critical. I mean, you're going to get cheaper prices on younger stallions versus more proven older stallions. But you know, the basis that you take a lot of failure out of your matings if you rely on more proven stallions. If you go 100% young and unproven, you better have an awfully good mare band. And Burton Jones is a great breeder and starts his stallions out great and always, you know, backs his young stallions with 40 or 50 of his own mares. It's a remarkable test to how strong he believes in his young stallions. But you know, every farm, my own farm, Central Banker, you know, he didn't have to be a good stallion. And if he's not a good stallion, then you've got 40 mares that you've bred 3 times in a row, and you know, it can be painful.
Pete, is some of it a product of obviously the budget that the client is working with?
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And the problem with proven sires is they get more expensive. As far as freshman sires, from a commercial standpoint, as far as selling yearlings by those sires, you oftentimes get more bang for your buck. It may not in the long run work out, but in the short term, good thing about a freshman sire, no one has ever had a bad foal by him. I mean, they've never had a bad racehorse by him. And once you get into that 3rd and 4th crop, you start going, people, I'm never going to have another Tiz now because I've had 2 of them. And my favorite horse to hate, who's a great sire, is Bernardini, because every one of them I've bought is slow. So you get these like opinions that you form that you can't get out of sometimes. But Mike is right in saying that, you know, freshman sires are dicey to some point. On the other side of the coin, I don't think anybody thought American Pharoah was dicey. So, you know, I mean, there are certain horses that just absolutely stand out when they go to stud, and they have a good chance of making it.
Clark?
You know, I think the commercial market, it forces us sometimes as breeders to make the wrong decisions just because of the commercial market. So I just try to keep a level-headed approach and a big picture approach at it. So I'm looking more for just the way it's bred, and then the horse has to fit. But as far as the catalog page, that sire and that female family, that's just going to dictate how much I'm going to have to pay for the horse that I like.
We are going to test the confirmation, not test, but find out what everybody sees when they look at it, because the interesting thing I find is that even with confirmation, and even some things that are absolutes, there's a lot of interpretation as well. So we may get some very different takes, I think, in looking at it. We've got 3 slides to take a look at. You're each going to see a view of the horse, and I'd just ask each of you to point out the things you like and you don't like. We're going to start with you, Mike, first, and then we'll go to Clark and then Pete.
How big is that horse? I mean, I don't really like its right knee. It looks offset to me from this angle. It's really interesting to try and just do stills like this. And a lot of times when we're looking at horses, we're moving around the horse and looking at it from all different angles, and it gives you a good idea. And most importantly, when it's walking, that's when I assess the front end.
Excuse me just one second, but pictures are the best way to sell a bad horse.
Right.
Because you can, by angles and everything, make things look bad. So I want I'm taking no credit for this.
Well, there you go. But I do like the musculature of the forearm. It looks like she's got a decent chest, but maybe not a very big horse, just from the look of it, from looking at shadows and so on.
Clark?
I mean, it's very evident offset right front.
Anything else, Pete, that you like?
The one
or don't
thing
like?
about this is, yes, this is offset in that right front, but it also, the forearm comes in fairly straight into the knee, and then the cannon bone is shifted to the outside, but comes out straight. If this horse walked well and did not kind of place weight abnormally through the joint, it's still one I would look at as a racehorse. But again, from one picture like this, it's hard to tell. Now, having said that, if this horse, you know, if it was knock-kneed or really torquing through that joint, that would put me off. Another thing about this horse, it has a nice short cannon bone, which we all like to see. So it's got some, yeah, you can throw out horses too quickly, and one picture like this does not tell the whole story.
Can we have the next slide? And we'll stay with you, Pete. I think we have 3 in a row.
You know, again, looks to be base narrow, rotates out a bit. Again, that right knee is offset. I was thought that you were just changing pastures for a while between the first picture and the second, but it's got a different tail too. This has got a bang tail, so I knew it wasn't the same horse.
Pete? I'm sorry, Mike?
I don't like this horse's left knee as much as the right one. I mean, the right one's toed out, but I'm pretty critical on the left leg. I mean, we do most of our racing in America at high speed is all left-hand turns, so I'm always a little bit harder on the left leg. If that leg, it doesn't look like it would track well to me. It looks like it would paddle. So I'd probably be harder on this horse than the last horse. The last horse, like Pete said, you know, if it walked well, you'd probably be okay with it. And I'd take another point to that. If it x-rayed well in the right knee, that would even give you more vindication that right knee was going to be okay. If you look at a young horse and it's offset and it's already got spurring or other sorts of issues like that, you can be a lot harder. You know that confirmation is already causing an issue. So this horse here, I'd probably be harder on the left leg.
And you, Clark?
Definitely base narrow, and I think it's by virtue too that, you know, in the right front, and it's broke in at the knee, so it just kind of.
You know, there's some soundness studies where the in at the knee is actually a protective measure, and some of those horses are sounder. Recently done by Wayne McElraith in Colorado.
So next slide. And it's interesting when we talk about confirmation how things change with time based on what we see and who works and doesn't work. Clark, let's start with you.
Is this a yearling or a weanling or? I mean, he's about as wide as a fish.
Which I think is what they called real quiet, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what came to my mind. Was it? I mean, you could almost write a book there. So I just won't even begin.
Anything else from either of you?
Well, I mean, age is the big question with this horse, because if this is say a short yearling, if it's January and he's towed out like that, he still has a long way to mature. And taking a very glass half full opinion, you could hope that as his shoulders widen, his conformation is going to improve. But it's a difficult horse to like based on this
Your
angle.
glass is half full, and mine has just one sip left in it for this poor guy.
Yeah.
You know, he rotates in that left front pretty bad all the way down and through the long pasterns. And I don't know what the heck he's doing with his left hind, but it looks like this thing is about as cow-hawked as you can get. So of the 3, and again, they're all at different stages, I think, as far as, you know, age-wise, but I'd say this horse would be suspect to have the most soundness problems of the 3 of them.
Okay, now we're going to take a look at some confirmation photos of actual racehorses that everybody's familiar with. I'm going to ask each panelist to use their evaluation. So we'll start with you, Clark, on this one.
You know, you see balance there. You see great shoulder depth, great hip. I know that's a stallion just because of the background, but no, it's just, I mean, I just see good balance there.
Mike?
Awesome shoulder, matches the hip, the lengths between the, you know, if you divide that horse's body, it's super symmetrical, and a strong neck. You know, maybe would like to see the neck just a little longer to be a distancy type horse, but this is probably a super fast sprinter. So.
Pete?
Same thing, great shoulder. You know, the neck looks a little short, but that could be the picture. And also, he is a stallion already, so he's starting to fill out like a stallion would in that shoulder. But, you know, overall balance is that of a sprinter miler, I would say.
So this would be, though, a horse that you felt comfortable from a confirmation standpoint. I mean, aside, obviously, pedigree is going to play it. Okay, let's take a look at the next slide. That's who it was. but maybe a little beyond the sprint and mile. But he was very good at those distances.
But his head is turned, which alters his neck length.
Could you get better
And
photographs?
that's not a yearling or a 2-year-old we're trying to buy either, so.
Right.
Let's take a look at the next slide. Okay, Pete?
Okay, well, certainly has more length to him and has, the neck and the way it ties into the shoulder is very good. Again, back to starting from the hoof up, he's got that good angle to his pastern and hoof, nice short cannon, longer forearm. Hocks might be a tick out behind him, but it could be, but again, overall balance. By the way, American Pharoah does look like a sprinter miler.
He does. He does.
But, this kind of looks like more of a classic distance horse to me.
And Mike?
I like American Pharoah better. I'm not sure if I do like this horse, but I don't love his shoulder as much. And I'm sure there's going to be a trick here. One of these guys is going to be the stable pony from Dwayne Lucas. So we're all being a little careful now that we see the game. But I like Pharoah's shoulder better, and I felt like his body was more racy. Now this horse is going to be racier than most horses, and it's still obviously a nice horse. No problems with his legs. Like Pete said, when we say his hocks are behind him a little bit, if you see his hind leg, his left hind, it's nice and straight, 90-degree angle, or perpendicular to the ground, his cannon bone. But to get that way, it's actually a little bit behind his hip. So if you kept that straight line, keep going straight up to his hip, it's about an inch or so behind his hip. Some horses look more like German shepherds than horses the way their hind legs are. And this guy's not nearly like that, but I like a little bit better hock.
And Clark?
Yeah, instantly you see the difference in the length of the horse. And for a horse of that stature, and there again, this is just being critical, but you'd probably want to see a little bit more hip on that horse, a little bit more balance, but if it's who I think it is, you see that through the progeny.
Okay. Well, let's show the next slide.
Very wrong. And the horse is not that much
So,
stretchier.
Mike, I would ask one question. When you were assessing it, I'm just curious because we all have our biases or our inherent likes and leans towards something. English Channel's obviously a leading turf sire.
Right.
Do you tend to focus more or gravitate more toward dirt horses?
I actually try to buy one English Channel a year. It's one of my goals at each yearling season. The hind leg is exactly what you expect from English Channel, and it's not a fault in his case. And that's something you have to get used to also, is what can I accept by this stallion that I can't accept by another stallion. This is an extremely small horse. He's not nearly the physical of American Pharoah at all. In fact, if you
Wasn't he like a $40,000 yearling?
$40,000 horse.
Yeah.
So this is not what is known as a good horse. This is a good stallion who's thrown good horses. But
If I remember, Todd asked J.J. Pletcher, why did you buy him?
right. It was almost like an accident buy.
Worked out pretty well after the fact.
Yeah.
Let's go to the third one, and we'll start with you, Mike.
A strong, heavy neck. It's kind of set up on his shoulder a little bit high. He might just be looking, sometimes horses will arch their, he's kind of ears pricked and got a high headset in that picture. I don't really like that, but he's a very heavy horse. He's probably a big stallion, I would guess. His withers looks like it falls off a little bit. So if you look at his back line, there's a pretty good drop from the top of his withers to his back. Depending on the age of the horse, that might be something you'd be concerned about as a breeder. If that's a really young horse, you'd probably be, shying away from him just a little bit. But horses overcome that. I think Curlin is often, I think Curlin has that back line. And then his legs look pretty good. His hind leg looks strong. His gaskin looks good. He's got a good hip and shoulder as well.
Well, I'm going to skip right ahead because if we show the next slide, you're right on. We're gonna thank you so much, and I would not put a stable pony up there for you guys. Julie wouldn't either. But I think it does show you the range of opinions, but also how sometimes the body type or the individual can fool you a little bit. But there are some things to focus in on or as a starting point in conversation.